everyone. Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at.
The right plan for Chicago is that we invest in them.
Chicago's budget is still up in the air. A panel of Alderpeople on what next year's spending plan could look like. And the man suspected of killing the UnitedHealthcare CEO has been identified. We dig into the public reaction to his death. And now to some of today's top stories. Despite being in a position to oversee the Chicago Police Department, even the president of the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability can't escape the department's traffic stop practices. Anthony Driver tells WTTW News that he's been pulled over by CPD officers 5 times in 2024 alone. He says 2 of those stops were for an expired registration sticker and once for suspicion of making an unsafe lane change. But Driver says officers refused to give him a reason for the other 2 stops, and he wasn't ticketed for any of them. He tells us he believes his appearance as a 6'3", 200-pound black man with locked hair factored into those stops. For more on Driver's role in crafting rules to limit police traffic stops, please visit our website. 70 unhoused Chicago men will have a new temporary home, marking a new approach to homelessness in Chicago.
We know that we need not just warm, safe, and dry spaces, but trauma-informed spaces with staff that are paid fair wages, right? Who know what they're doing, who can work with our neighbors to help them figure out whatever barriers are in the way for them getting back out on their feet.
49th Ward Alderwoman Maria Haddon was one of several officials who cut the ribbon at the new Northside Housing and Supportive Services facility in Rogers Park. The men who live at the facility will be able to stay there 24 hours a day versus having to leave in the mornings. They'll receive food, shelter, health care, and other wraparound services. Nearly 70% of Chicagoans experiencing homelessness are men, yet only 22% of the city's shelter beds are available for single men. This one will serve 250 men a year. The Illinois State Police is touting its record of success. The ISP says it's obtained charges in 100% of 2023 Chicago area expressway shooting homicides. In all, there were 5 Chicago area expressway killings in 2023. State police say highway shootings this year are down 32% compared to this time last year and 51% compared to 2022, 71% compared to 2021. Up next, an outpouring of anger at the healthcare system after an insurance company CEO's killing. That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
New York police have named a suspect in the shooting death of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson in Manhattan last week. Police say 26-year-old Luigi Mangione had a gun believed to be the one used in the killing, as well as writings suggesting his anger with corporate America. Last week, investigators shared that ammunition found near Thompson's body was etched with the words delay, deny, and depose. It's all led to a wave of public feelings like anger, resentment, and frustration with the healthcare industry. Joining us to discuss the range of feelings about healthcare or about health insurance are Mark Mulrow, president of A Safe Haven Foundation, and Anthony Losasso, a healthcare economist who is professor and chair of the economics department at DePaul University. Thanks to you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Mark Mulrow, let's start with you, please. There was, and I should also mention, we also reached out to a number of health insurers. They declined our invitation, though the Illinois Life and Health Insurance Council also declined to join, but they did provide a statement, which we will share in a moment. And again, thanks to the both of you for being here. Mark Mulrow, let's start with you, please. There was a barrage of social media posts from people showing some serious indifference to the death of Brian Thompson being murdered. Some comments like, quote, thoughts and prayers are out of network, which is clearly very callous. But why do you think this was the response from so many people?
As you said, it's a very callous response. I think overall a lot of people are frustrated with the cost of insurance is so high, the accessibility of it, and they were looking for a target, and unfortunately this poor man who was killed became a target of those comments. But it doesn't address what the situation is in the industry, that the costs are rising, the access is limited, providers are not compensated the way they should be. And we have a quality cost system that is, for an industrialized nation such as ours, we're at the top of the industry, but at the lower ends of healthcare. And the consumer's getting frustrated.
And as you're speaking, of course, we're looking at some of those tweets from some folks on your screen right now. Anthony Lasasso, the words delay, deny, depose, I'm seeing different reports. Was it deny, defend, depose? But we all get the idea about those words etched on the ammunition, echoing words that are used by health insurance industry critics. What's your reaction to that detail?
Well, of course, it's a terrible tragedy that this individual chose to behave in this way to kill somebody over this issue. So I mean, it's really a terrible tragedy for sure. I do think that health insurance generally is one of these areas that it is always the focus of a lot of anger and frustration. I'm not entirely convinced that all of it is justified. I think that a lot of people don't quite understand exactly the fact that health insurers, they do two things. They try to protect against these risks that we all face, and that is undeniably a good thing. We all benefit from that. Historically, insurance has been one of the most amazing creations that humanity has done for itself. But when you bring risk protection, what happens then is that you have the flip side of that, which is that now people have an incentive to use more services, okay? And that's we call that in the industry, we call that moral hazard, and that is that's an issue, that's a known issue. Health insurers try to come up with ways to try to limit what we might call overconsumption of healthcare services. It's even worse than that, though, because most individuals are going to say, I'm not going to overconsume, I'm going to do what my doctor tells me to do. Your doctor knows that there is this built-in moral hazard, again, to use a jargon term, in the healthcare and health insurance system. So everybody, doctors, patients, they all want more care. It's all expensive, okay? So the insurer has the unenviable task of trying to judge what is worthwhile care, what is less worthwhile care. It is a terrible spot to be in, but they are charged with that responsibility.
Mark, your organization, Safe Haven, you all focus on providing assistance for suffering from complex economic challenges. What sort of barriers do the people that you help or support, what do they face when dealing with healthcare industries?
Well, I think in addition to experiencing homelessness, there's substance abuse, behavioral health care issues, there's trauma from poverty, from living in areas that have disparate health care. One of our locations is about 6 blocks outside of the medical district, but it's one of the least served areas in the city of Chicago. So you see a lot of things that are coming into place that cause frustration and anger. And you see a lot of I think from the insurance standpoint, this is kind of the population that's often the last served. They're forgotten. They're left to the state and they're left to outside agencies to provide the gaps because our coverage is an episodic coverage. We'd rather treat somebody in an emergency room than do preventative health. We'd rather treat somebody for a larger condition, which is a higher reimbursement rate, than teaching them how to maintain their health and giving them the resources that they need to maintain health, housing, food, making sure that they can afford to support their family, that they have behavioral health care. All those things come into it, and it becomes a bureaucracy of cost rather than a doctor making a decision with his patient or a healthcare professional. I think you were talking about upcoding, which is
Well,
it's a debate.
Sounds like a very technical term, upcoding. It sounds complicated.
It's kind of where you start out and you keep building upon the insurance. You start at the lowest level and build up on the testing, et cetera.
Well, and so I want to get to a statement. I apologize. But as I mentioned, we did receive a statement from the Illinois Life and Health Insurance Council that reads, quote, "Violence is never the answer. In the strongest terms possible, we condemn any suggestion that threats made against anyone working in any industry in our country are ever acceptable. There's a time and place for further discussion, but for now, let us not intermingle or conflate the justification of a cold-blooded murder in broad daylight with policy discussions about the complexities of the United States healthcare system." Anthony, to you first. While there is, as the statement said, there's never a justification for a murder like this, but could this discussion that comes out of it, could that lead to some changes or at the least a deeper examination into the practices of the industry?
Well, I guess I would hope that, yeah, it's a good statement, and it, I think, hits the right points. But you know, I would like to see, I think, I'd like to see the insurance industry probably do a better job of, I think, discussing why there are efforts at times, not always, but to try to push back on what providers will often try to push on patients. Again, not all providers, not all the time. Most providers, of course, have the patient's best interest in mind, but every provider I know is human, and they respond to incentives too. And so those incentives are to do more invasive procedures. Those are all costly. And in the healthcare sector, as I think we all know at this point, there's a great deal of uncertainty about what works and what doesn't work. And sometimes watchful waiting is the best thing to do. You can't bill for watchful waiting versus an invasive procedure.
Okay, 30 seconds left. Mark Mulrow, same question to you. Do you think this discussion could lead to a deeper examination into the healthcare industry?
I think it's sad that somebody's had to lose their life for us to have a discussion on how to effectively deliver health care in our system, especially a country as rich as ours. I think there's a lot of challenging, complex issues to be addressed, and we really can get that going through better utilization of our systems, better utilization of our resources, our funding. But violence is never an answer,
Absolutely
ever.
Not. Okay, a lot to talk about here. I'm not going to solve it all tonight. My thanks to both of you for joining us, Anthony Lazasso and Mark Mulrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, the latest on the city's fraught budget negotiations. Stay with us. With a key city council committee set to vote on Mayor Brandon Johnson's latest budget proposal tomorrow, will the third time be the charm?
You know, the first step, of course, is tomorrow, but I am tremendously grateful that there are so many members of City Council who are open to this process and have provided great feedback so far.
Do you think you'll get to the finish line by Friday?
I mean, that is certainly the effort of my administration. I said I'm going to do my job and present a balanced budget. Again, I'm grateful to the members of City Council who have shown up with a great deal of ideas. We've just said that we have to continue to make critical investments without cutting services and laying people off. I think that's important for the people of Chicago.
The spending plan comes after Alderpeople turned away two earlier pitches that included huge property tax hikes. The countdown is on. The City Council has just over 2 weeks to pass a budget or face a potential government shutdown. The plan has sparked intense debate over tax increases, spending cuts, and funding priorities. Joining us now are 28th Ward Alderman Jason Irvin, who represents neighborhoods including West Garfield Park, Austin, and North Lawndale. 6th Ward Alderman William Hall, representing communities like Chatham, Auburn Gresham, and Inglewood. 15th Ward Alderman Raymond Lopez, whose constituents include Brighton Park, Gage Park, and back of the yards. And Alderman Andre Vasquez from the 40th Ward, representing neighborhoods like Andersonville, Lincoln Square, and Edgewater. Full house tonight, gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us. Alderman Irvin, let's start with you because you're the chair of the Budget Committee. As we mentioned, the City Council unanimously rejected that $300 million property tax hike, then more quietly rejected the proposed $150 million property tax hike. Will the City Council approve one that is $68.5 million?
I believe City Council will approve the property tax increase. Again, no one wants to cut services. When you ask people about services, no one wants to see reductions in services. However, you also ask them in a vacuum, hey, do you want a property tax increase? Of course, they're going to tell you no. But again, the fact that people do not want service cuts leads me to believe that we need to find revenue in order to keep the level of service that we have.
Alderman Lopez, Mayor Johnson has called the budget process collaborative. Has that been your experience?
That has not been my experience, nor the experience of many members of the City Council. Earlier in August, we got this document, which was the budget forecast, and we've had nearly 5 months where we could have talked about this in advance of coming to this point. That hasn't been the case, and I think that while many Chicagoans want us to continue providing desperately needed city services, they don't want to feel as though they're being nickel and dimed at every turn, or they don't want to see that there are patronage jobs and needless management in that budget. And I think we haven't gotten to the core of that. The mayor came back with a $3 million reduction in one department after we proposed $560 million to get back to 2020 spending levels. So I think there's plenty of room to negotiate still if the mayor and his team want to come back to the table and have an honest conversation.
Do you really want to go back to 2020? Even the council?
If that's what we have to do to show good faith, absolutely.
Really? Okay.
And you know what? And I think the mayor's office should do that too, because he's
Okay.
$5 million more than when we were back then. I think people
And we're 12.
understand.
Just keep that in mind.
Are you referring to 2020 spending levels and
Correct.
budget levels?
2020 spending levels, yes.
Okay.
Alderman Vasquez, budget's more than 2 weeks overdue. There are just 22 days until the deadline by state law. What do you think went wrong here?
Yeah, I do agree with my colleague as far as the process not being collaborative. We ultimately found out what the budget proposal was going to be on the 30th. I think the council is learning what it means to be a co-equal branch. So voting down one proposal unanimously, moving things down now where it's close to a fifth of what it was. We just have to be empowered and understand how to actually have these processes improve. And so that's something we're working to do. That if we would have talked about this sooner, vetted all these questions, we wouldn't find ourselves crammed at the end of the quarter and figuring out with like 20 days to go how to solve a budget. And I think the people of Chicago want to have confidence in city government. I'll say this process has been transparent, but it doesn't feel like it was a willing transparency. It occurred because the council was pushing back to try to solve this.
A couple of votes are expected this week. Do you feel confident that will lead to budget passage in time for the December 31st deadline?
I think that for the chairman to have a better idea of how confident one could feel. But I do think that a reality is a budget needs to be passed before the end of the year. That if we fail to do that, it won't be about one person or the other. People will look at city government as a whole and say, we're not serving them, and I don't think that's a place we want to be in.
Alderman Hall, are you concerned that the city might see its credit downgraded, which would make, of course, borrowing more expensive?
Yeah, what I'm concerned about is political tactics that end up taking us to this point. At the end of the day, we passed a $1 billion bond deal, and the credit score has gone up. We don't want to lose the trend. We don't want to lose the momentum. It's been a long time since we've done business without selling the city in the process. And so I think that staying the course of making sure that we make the necessary payments to keep our credit score the way it needs to be so that we can go to the future if necessary, borrow, I think that's pivotal to the stability of the city. We know what bad credit score looks like. Matter of fact, the one of the highest tax bills that we paid for going back, half of that money was used to pay bad bills under Rahm Emanuel. So we know what it's like to have bad credit score and bad budgeting. I think that what we have to look forward to the future is indeed fiscal responsibility, but maintaining levels that lets us be a serious business partner in the markets.
Alderman Lopez, as you mentioned, the mayor's latest budget proposal, you feel that it nickel and dime Chicagoans with nearly half a dozen tax hikes. What would you propose instead? What would you like to see?
Well, I think the real problem that we have, Brandis, is that we don't know what the true cost of government is, correct? We are not able to get a legitimate accounting for what we need to operate what we call the city of Chicago's government. We're actually just taxing so that we have money to spend, as opposed to saying this is what exactly we need and then going from there. And nowhere is that more evident in the fact that now 3 times we've seen this administration reforecast revenue projections to try to create a balanced budget. You can't keep fudging the numbers just to get to the end goal.
It's
And I
not
think
a
that's what we keep
fudge, It's the
seeing.
timing. When you estimate revenue in August, it's one thing. When you come back in September or October with more data, you get, surer data. Right now, you're looking at a forecast on something we're about to go into a new year. So we would have the best numbers today versus 3-4 months ago. And that's essentially what you're seeing.
But our revenue projections are based on a 3-year period. To say that that dramatically changed from October 30th to
The data has changed. We went
yesterday.
into last year thinking we were going to get $450 million from the state and
yet-
we're shorted almost $200 million.
and yet
So
we're still making
again,
projections based on what
you
we
have to make projections because
Right.
that's all you have to operate with.
But you're
again, as you
fudging
get
them.
closer, it's not fudging. As you get closer to reality, you actually get to see what those numbers really are. I think in many cases, we're trying to put something together, and at this point of the process, we're talking about ultimately $40-50 million over $5 billion budget area here. And again, that generally falls into the corporate fund every year. So I find it difficult to believe that we're sitting over here arguing over couch change at the end of the day when we look at this thing in its totality. So
we
I'm
went
hopeful
from
that,
300 million to 150 to 68, we could get down to zero.
but again, we've had to add additional things. We raised the PPLT tax up to $128 million to make that happen. We raised taxes on parking to make that happen. So this isn't anything new. We've had to come up with new revenue to make that happen.
But without cutting a single job,
So
without addressing
for
any
the
of those
folks out there
things.
watching, this is what's happening. You've got the last quarter, you've got 2 months of people who have different views on how to solve a problem, right? The mayor proposed one. Members said this wasn't what we were accepting, but you've got a body of 50 people looking at it differently. So we don't set ourselves up for success when you're cramming that into a 2-month period.
But one thing we must take in consideration is this. When you start using code words like budget cuts, that means people are going to lose their jobs. And at the end of the day, let's be honest, none of some of those who are making these proposals of cuts have the testicular courage to go to the door and say, I'm taking your job.
Are you gonna
Nobody
tell, are you
has
gonna tell your
so,
residents
so
you're gonna take their
essentially at
taxes
the
instead?
end of the day, those who lose jobs can't pay tax bills. You don't pay tax bills, you lose homes.
I would
so at the
push
end
back
of the
a
day,
little
let me
bit on that.
finish.
Sure.
At the end of the day, what we have to look at is a budget that's both fair indeed. Again, no one's disagreeing on fiscal responsibility and fiscal management, taking a different approach at it, but at the cost of people who need jobs. We have people that are trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. And so we have administration that put forth a budget proposal to keep jobs. No one wants people to lose jobs. And I find it very odd that people are proposing budgets that cause people to lose jobs.
I would disagree with the assertion. When somebody's trying to find efficiencies in budget cuts, it's not just losing jobs. They keep trying to frame it as though you want to get rid of firefighters. It's not the case. The mayor's office has grown.
Well, if
It's
taxes
it's
pay
doubled.
for firefighters, if taxes pay for cops, if taxes pay for roads, you don't raise taxes, you don't use taxes.
Right.
Then how
But
do you
no
pay
one-
for the salaries?
easy.
How do you pay for the
What you
pensions?
do is you
How do you
find-
pay for the communities? Essentially, at the
Here's-
end of the day, we have to respect the role that taxes play in government.
Well, you're incorrect on that
I'm sorry,
assessment.
but
Sorry.
as the subcommittee chairman for revenue, what did you come up with?
Well, I came up essentially, number one, with a system for people to propose ideas. That's number one.
But you
Which
came
is-
up with-
excuse me,
but
excuse
that's
me,
a
let me
word
finish.
salad.
You asked me a question.
But
What
because
has-
we know
what-
the answer. You
what-
came up with nothing.
Essentially, what
other
we
than
have,
putting
number one,
marijuana
is
on
a
every
form.
corner.
Excuse me, I'm going to jump in here because there is something else that got cut. There are $90 million in spending cuts being proposed, including reductions in funds for small businesses and basic income programs. Alderman Irvin, do you think these cuts undermine efforts to support economic recovery, and particularly in underserved communities?
That's exactly what it is. And every time we go back to the table with additional changes, we will impact the communities that are in need the most. When I go to Mount Greenwood, when I go to Saucanash, everything looks beautiful, everything looks great. People are working, life is great. But when you go to Garfield Park, when you go to Roseland, that's not the case. Communities in Chicago have challenges. And if we don't help communities meet the challenges, then ultimately these things lead to greater problems. So all the thing I would say is that every time we've come back, we've made cuts. And guess where those cuts have landed? On the backs of people who can least afford them.
All right, we've got a minute left. Alderman Vasquez and hopefully Alderman Hall as well. Do you think this episode, this entire budgeting episode, has sort of raised questions about the progressive ability to govern in Chicago?
I think even before the budget process, that's what people are at. I think the one thing that is clear is that there's a lack of confidence in how the mayor's been moving, as well as the progressive movement. People view us as potentially not being competent in moving in certain directions. And so what we do next, how we solve these problems, how we engage with each other, is what changes that narrative. Because there are plenty of people who are progressive who know how to figure out budgets, who are trying to find efficiencies and trying to make sure that we all work to have a government that actually addresses the needs of people. That's possible. And just because people see examples where it's not the case, doesn't mean it speaks for everyone.
I think that progressive equals people making sure that they get fair jobs, people making sure that work environments are correct, and people making a living wage and not just an hourly wage. And I think that that's what sustainable revenue looks like to the future, is progressing to sustain neighborhoods, 9-to-5 people, and make Chicago great. We put them on our shoulders and we win.
Best of luck to you all this week. We'll look forward to hearing what you all come up with, and we'll have to leave it there. Alderman Irvin, Hall, Lopez, and Vasquez, thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having us.
And that is our show for this Monday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Our Spotlight Politics team on the flap over a top mayoral aide's residency and, of course, the latest on the city budget. And a longtime political insider's new book on the reign of Mayor Richard M. Daley. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to give back to its community in Chicago and beyond.